George Reeves' private diary hidden for decades says something very different. In it, he wrote, "She was a poisonous snake. She ruined everything." Who was he talking about? And could this shocking confession finally reveal what really happened the night he died? Let's hear from you before we begin. Do you believe George Reeves took his own life, type 1, or was he silenced by someone else, type 0, in the comments? Because what you're about to hear might change everything. In the golden age of television, George Reeves stood as a towering figure clad in blue and red, deflecting bullets and leaping buildings in a single bound. To children across America, he was Superman, the moral compass of a generation, the ultimate symbol of justice, strength, and decency. But behind the cape, the smile, and the reassuring voice was a man battling demons. On June 16, 1959, the nation awoke to news that would shatter its illusion of the Man of Steel. George Reeves was dead. He was only 45. And then there were the whispers, the rumors of a secret diary, the alleged final words scrawled with raw emotion and betrayal. "She was a poisonous snake," the entry supposedly read. "I should have known." No such diary has ever been produced. No handwritten note has ever been verified. But the line took on a life of its own, passed down in hushed tones, embedded in conspiracy theories, immortalized in fan forums and amateur investigations. Who was she? Was it Leonore Lemon, the volatile fiancée known for her temper and erratic behavior, or Toni Mannix, the powerful wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix, with whom Reeves had an intense, years-long affair? As decades passed, the line blurred between fact and folklore. George Reeves became more than the actor who portrayed Superman. He became a Hollywood enigma, the subject of suspicion, scandal, and sorrow. What really happened that night? Did George Reeves leave behind a diary? A confession? A final cry for justice? Or is this poisonous snake, quote, just another invention in the legend that grew around his death? The heartbreak, the betrayal, and the unanswered questions that continue to haunt the shadow of the Man of Steel. Before the tragedy, before the rumors, before the mysterious quote that would haunt his legacy, George Reeves was a working actor trying to find his place in Hollywood. His journey to stardom was not instant. It was slow, uncertain, and full of detours. Born George Kiefer Brewer in Woolstock, Iowa in 1914, Reeves moved to California at a young age with his mother. He took an interest in acting in college, studying at Pasadena Junior College and later performing at the Pasadena Playhouse, a well-known stepping stone for aspiring actors. His big break came in 1939 when he landed a small but noticeable role in the now legendary Gone with the Wind, as Stuart Tarleton, one of Scarlett O'Hara's early suitors. But, unlike many of his co-stars who went on to fame and fortune, Reeves struggled to maintain momentum. The next decade saw him bouncing from role to role, often in B-movies or serials. He was competent, handsome, and charismatic, but not quite a leading man in the studio system's eyes. It wasn't until 1951 that his life and his identity changed forever. That year, he was cast as Superman Clark Kent in Adventures of Superman, a low-budget television show based on the popular comic book hero. The producers were unsure about the show's potential, and Reeves himself reportedly saw the role as beneath him. He worried it would typecast him and limit his chances at serious film work. He wasn't wrong. The show was a hit with kids who adored the moral clarity, the superhero antics, and the dependable presence of Reeves on screen. Suddenly, he was a household name, but only as Superman. Offers for adult roles dried up. Directors didn't see George Reeves the actor. They saw a man in tights who couldn't possibly be anything else. He felt trapped, said Phyllis Coates, who played Lois Lane in the show's first season. He was grateful for the work, but he hated what it did to his career. Reeves became increasingly frustrated with the narrowness of his fame. His attempts to transition into directing and producing met resistance. His appearance in From Here to Eternity, a serious war drama, was allegedly cut down in post-production because test audiences were too distracted by Superman in uniform. Children adored him, but adults looked right through him. And worse, he was expected to live as a real-life role model. Studios were terrified of anything that might tarnish Superman's image, imposing strict expectations on his behavior in public. The fame was real, but so were the chains. Behind the confident smile of Superman, George Reeves was quietly struggling with depression, professional disillusionment, and a growing sense that he had reached a dead end. In many ways, the cape that made him famous became the same one that buried his career. And then came the complications of his personal life. The relationships that would fuel controversy, heartache, and ultimately the speculation around his tragic death. While George Reeves grappled with the limitations of fame and career frustration, his personal life became increasingly entangled in a web of passion, secrecy, and danger. At the center of it all were two women, Toni Mannix and Leonore Lemmon, whose names would echo long after his death. Toni Mannix was no ordinary Hollywood mistress. She was the wife of Eddie Mannix, a high-ranking executive at MGM, and a man with considerable influence and rumored mob ties. In the early 1950s, Reeves and Toni began a relationship that was shockingly open, given the times. Eddie Mannix, it was said, knew of the affair and allowed it possibly out of convenience or some unspoken arrangement. Toni was more than just a lover. She was a benefactor, a stabilizing force in Reeves's chaotic career. She showered him with expensive gifts, financed his home, and provided emotional support during the most challenging years of his Superman tenure. Reeves reportedly leaned on her heavily, even when their relationship became strained. In Hollywood circles, it was whispered that Toni was possessive, deeply devoted to George, and quietly enraged at the idea of losing him. In 1958, Reeves abruptly ended his relationship with Toni and became involved with Leonore Lemmon, a former New York socialite known for her sharp wit and volatile behavior. The shift shocked those close to him. Leonore was younger, brash, and unpredictable, an intense contrast to Toni's refined maternal demeanor. The romance with Leonore moved quickly. Within months, they were engaged, but friends and colleagues noted signs of instability. Fights where frequent alcohol flowed freely, and Reeves appeared to be increasingly withdrawn and unhappy. Some who visited the couple described their home as tense, even hostile. It wasn't love, one anonymous friend said, it was an obsession, and he looked trapped. Some believed Reeves regretted the relationship. Others thought Leonore's influence over him was growing toxic. Still, the engagement stood until the night of June 16, 1959. When Reeves was found dead in his bedroom, both women, Toni and Leonore, immediately came under scrutiny. The public knew only the broad strokes: the actor dead, the fiancé in the house, the ex-lover devastated. But beneath the surface, more disturbing questions swirled. Could Leonore's jealousy have played a role? Was it Toni's heartbreak so consuming that it sparked a darker act? Did either of them know more than they admitted? Leonore's behavior after the death fueled suspicion. She gave conflicting statements to the police. She allegedly joked to guests that Reeves might did it himself before the fatal sound rang out. One theory suggested it went off during an argument, perhaps unintentionally. Toni, meanwhile, mourned privately. She continued to send flowers to Reeves's grave for years and reportedly kept a room in her house preserved just for him. And then there was the alleged diary, an unverified, likely apocryphal document that surfaced in Rumor a Diary, in which Reeves reportedly wrote bitterly about the final months of his life and described one of the women in his life as a poisonous snake. If the quote is true, who was he referring to, the possessive benefactor or the fiery fiancé? The truth remains elusive. But this tangled romantic triangle charged with emotion, manipulation, and power became the beating heart of the mystery. George Reeves was no longer just a Superman. He was a man ensnared by love, loyalty, and betrayal. On the evening of June 15, 1959, George Reeves seemed agitated. Though officially engaged to Leonore Lemmon, the atmosphere in their home at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive in Beverly Hills was anything but celebratory. That night, George retired early, reportedly complaining of insomnia and frustration. But before long, the night would spiral into chaos and end in tragedy. Leonore Lemmon's conduct that night was peculiar, to say the least. Her odd comment about him doing it himself has been interpreted as eerie foreshadowing or incriminating knowledge. She appeared erratic during police interviews and left town not long after the incident. She would later claim Reeves had been despondent, distraught over his career, and prone to dark moods. But those close to George disputed that version, insisting that while he had challenges, he was making plans discussing marriage, new film ventures, and even a return to Superman. Despite the inconsistencies, LAPD closed the case with relative speed, declaring the cause of death. No further investigation was pursued. The decision satisfied some, but many fans, friends, and amateur sleuths alike remained unconvinced. How could a man who had made dinner plans for the next night, who had just bought new cars and was allegedly about to restart his acting career, suddenly decide to end his life? And what of the mysterious diary, the supposed entry declaring that she was a poisonous snake? If true, it may point to deeper turmoil, a relationship gone sour, a betrayal, or perhaps an accusation from beyond the grave. One particular piece of information stood out from the rest of the tales that circulated in the wake of George Reeves's passing, and that was a purported journal. A personal journal that is said to have been written by Reeves during the last few months of his life. An undiscovered document that has never been published, but which has been mentioned several times in rumors, interviews, and publications that are speculative. There were profoundly personal comments contained in the journal according to individuals who claimed to have seen or heard about it. These included disenchantment with Hollywood, resentment about his waning career, and most sensationally of all, a vitriolic note about a lady in his life. According to the allegations he wrote, she was a poisonous snake. I ought to have known that she would cause me to fail. There is no way to determine for certain if this quotation is genuine or fictitious. The diary itself has never been made available to the general public. There is no confirmed extract available. Nevertheless, this has not prevented authors, documentarians, and conspiracy theorists from considering it as a piece of evidence that has the potential to incite cataclysmic events. In the event that the journal was in fact real, to whom was George referring? The majority of people assume that the phrase is referring to Leonore Lemon, who was his spouse at the time of his passing. Their relationship had been fraught with difficulties. Friends related stories of public humiliations, drinking binges, and yelling confrontations that they had endured. Arguments between the pair were not limited to verbal exchanges. On occasion, they led to physical altercations inside the relationship. Those with knowledge of the situation said that George was on the point of terminating the engagement. If what he said was accurate, and if he considered Leonore to be emotionally manipulative or even dangerous, then the word poisonous snake may have been a parting and condemning statement. Some people claimed that George was afraid of her rage, or that he suspected she had hidden agendas such as money gain, social climbing, or perhaps something more sinister. Because of the uncertainty, a story was developed that suggested Leonore was involved in some way, if not in his death, then in his unraveling. However, there is an additional idea that suggests the phrase was referring to Toni Mannix. In spite of the fact that she was loving and supportive during the majority of their relationship, Toni was also strongly connected to the elite of Hollywood. And maybe most crucially, she was married to Eddie Mannix. A man who had a shady reputation, was said to have links to the mafia, and had a habit of making issues disappear. Even when George ended his relationship with Toni, there were others who thought that she never really let go of the past. Some scholars have proposed that Toni or someone associated with her would have been in a position to handle the Reeves issue, both in terms of the means and the motivation to do so. Is it possible that the phrase poisonous snake makes a reference to betrayal? Would you like a warning about power and vengeance? The other version of the hypothesis is more sinister, and it is far more difficult to verify. A key reason why the concept of the diary is so appealing is because it promises something that neither a police report nor an autopsy could ever do purpose. Possibly, if George Reeves had actually written down his thoughts before he passed away, we might have a better understanding of what drove him to the brink of danger. The fact that the journal is not there, however, renders its potency theoretical. We just have assertions that have not been verified and no actual proof. There are those who are close to Reeves, including former co-workers, who have completely disproved the idea, noting that he has never kept a notebook. Others asserted that Toni Mannix or her colleagues may have discovered the diary after his passing and destroyed it, assuming that it had ever existed in the first place. That one term, poisonous snake, has established itself as a distinct entity in its own right. To this day, the recollection of Reeves's last days is haunted by it. It is a statement that conveys feelings of betrayal grief and the feeling that someone close to him may not have had his best interests in mind. This statement might be a true quote, or it could be the product of decades of intrigue. We are simply left with guesswork because there is no concrete proof to support our claims. However, under the haze of uncertainty, even a single poisonous sentence might reverberate more loudly than 1,000 pieces of information. In the year 1959, the unexpected passing of George Reeves caused shockwaves to go across the entertainment industry. Not only did fans express their sorrow at the loss of their favorite television characters, but the news also sparked something more profound inside the inner circles of Hollywood, including murmurs, finger-pointing, and a growing feeling that the official account did not make sense. The Los Angeles Police Department promptly terminated the case. The choice, on the other hand, was regarded with mistrust from the very beginning. A great number of people, even those who were closest to Reeves, were not satisfied with the straightforward explanation of the cause of death. Helen Besolo, George Reeves's mother, was adamantly opposed to the idea of her son's cause of death. She was adamant that her kid had been in a positive frame of mind and had many plans for the future. In point of fact, she was so certain that something nefarious had taken place that she decided to employ a private investigator named Jerry Giesler to investigate the situation surrounding the death. On the other hand, after initial excitement, the study soon came to a standstill, yielding very little tangible evidence and finally becoming obscure. The incredulity expressed by Reeves's mother was shared by his close pals. They noted how he had expressed newfound hope while discussing future projects such as the possibility of returning to the Superman series and how he had been considering future projects. According to a buddy who spoke with a reporter, he was planning things. "That does not sound like a man who is about to take his own life," the speaker said. Over the course of time, several hypotheses concerning the events that took place that evening emerged. There are others who believe that George's death was with the mob which was carried out on behalf of Eddie Mannix, an MGM fixer. What is the reason, a retribution for Reeves's decision to dump Toni Mannix, or a warning to others who have wronged the studio's upper management? This assumption was only reinforced by the widespread belief that there was a lack of forensic rigor at the death site. Others brought out Leonore's peculiar conduct and assertions that were incongruous with one another. Was she a party to a dispute that led to a more heated exchange? Is it possible that she pulled the trigger on purpose or by accident, or did she have more information than she was letting on? After the fatal sound, there are others who feel she went into a state of panic and altered the story to make it appear as though she committed herself. One of the most sinister hypotheses proposes that influential Hollywood insiders were deliberately responsible for concealing the facts. Is it possible that Eddie Mannix might have impacted the investigation that the police were doing if he had genuine links with organized crime? Is it possible that evidence such as the reported journal was obliterated in order to safeguard public reputations? In part, the fact that so little was known contributed to the success of these hypotheses. Almost immediately, the death scene was corrupted. Immediately, the police did not carry out fundamental checks such as checking for the presence of gunpowder residue. It was not until many hours later that witnesses were held for interrogation, and the important contradictions that were present in their statements were never resolved. For the most part, the entertainment sector remained silent during an era in which image was of the utmost importance. There was no interest on the part of studios in controversies, particularly those that included Superman. Reeves had been a well-known person, but he was not a significant celebrity. Therefore, the potential for causing controversy was larger than the potential return on investment from uncovering the truth. Even in subsequent years, when films and books reopened the issue, Hollywood provided nothing more than shrugs and acknowledgments that were only half-hearted. The case was relegated to the background, serving as an unsettling reminder of the more negative aspects of notoriety. Ben Affleck's portrayal of George Reeves in the film Hollywoodland, which was released in 2006, stands out as a striking exception. In addition to presenting a number of other hypotheses concerning his passing, the film rekindled interest in the investigation. Despite the fact that it was a work of fiction, the movie gave the impression that Reeves's death was anything but straightforward, and that even decades later, the business gave more weight to mystery than accountability. It has been alleged that Toni Mannix experienced a nervous breakdown following the passing of Reeves. According to some reports, she never achieved a full recovery. After that, she grew more reclusive throughout the course of the years that followed, and she ultimately passed away from Alzheimer's disease in 1983. It was said that she broke down and muttered, "I loved him," during an interview that took place not long before her condition became more severe. "My intention was never for that to take place." To this day, more charges have not been brought forth. There was no proof that could be considered conclusive. But there are still questions. Despite the fact that George Reeves' life was cut short by a tragic event, his legacy has not been forgotten. The guy who originally dreaded being pigeonholed as Superman eventually evolved into something far more complicated: a cultural icon, a mystery, and a cautionary story, all rolled into one. In the 1950s, Reeves was thought of as Superman by millions of people in the United States. Not only was he acting out a part, but he was also a living embodiment of the principles of truth, justice, and moral clarity. His parents had faith in us. He was a child's first love. Reruns of Adventures of Superman continued to captivate the imaginations of fresh audiences even after his death, which occurred some decades ago. In spite of the fact that George Reeves had mixed views about the character, his portrayal of Superman established a benchmark that remained in place for a considerable amount of time after the program had finished. The fact that he was more than just a superhero was due to his charisma, power, and relatability. He was a representation of the post-war optimism that existed during a simpler era in which good always prevailed over evil. Even more ironically, he was constrained by the same job. His inability to escape Superman's shadow was a contributing factor in the melancholy and frustration that many people believe pushed him to despair, or made him a target and led to his depression. Reeves became a Hollywood legend as a result of his unexplained death, which elevated him to the status of more than merely a figure in popular culture. In the same way that Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and Natalie Wood became members of a tragic elite, he became a member of the group of celebrities who passed away at a young age, leaving behind questions and speculations rather than closure. The unsolved mystery surrounding his death has resulted in the creation of books, videos, podcasts, and entire internet communities that are devoted to getting to the bottom of what the authorities previously thought was a straightforward investigation. Theories are plentiful. In a fit of wrath, did he end up being harmed? Is there someone who wants to keep him quiet? Is it possible that he was a man who was just unable to cope with the weight of fame and failure? The various depictions of George Reeves each present a unique image of him, and each one reflects the concerns of the industry that was responsible for his creation. It was partly because of Reeves' account that the long-standing myth of the Superman curse came into existence. This is a superstition that performers who are affiliated with the character are doomed to suffer negative outcomes. From the death of Reeves to Christopher Reeve's paralysis, the curse became a form of legend, a method to explain the peculiar pattern of disaster that appeared to follow the Cape. Over time, the Cape was associated with a number of tragic events. This demonstrates how profoundly spectators related with Reeves's life and character, despite the fact that many people discount the concept as a coincidence or because it is sensationalism. In the eyes of many, he was not only portraying Superman, rather, he was Superman. It was impossible to take his terrible end at its value since it was so upsetting. In spite of the suffering and the fact that he is a mystery, there is adoration and genuine regard for George Reeves the man. All of the actors and staff members who worked on Adventures of Superman recalled him as being kind, professional, and giving. In addition to paying their respects at his former residence, fans continued to pay their respects at his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Over the last few years, there have been efforts made to humanize him beyond the cape and the myths that spread about him. More attention has been paid to his personal generosity, his aspirations for creative independence, and his enduring presence in the history of television in biographies, interviews with friends who are still alive, and fan retrospectives. Someone who has worked with George in the past once commented, "George wanted to be more than Superman." However, the fact of the matter is that no one could have played him better. Not only does his legacy live on in film reels and repeats, but it also lives on in the ongoing discussion, the issues that remain unanswered, and the sense of loss that continues to attach to the manner in which he passed away. George Reeves had a life that was full of contrasts. The happiness that came with fame, and the load that it brought the love of millions of people, and the loneliness that he experienced behind the scenes, the myth of being unbeatable, and the reality of experiencing personal suffering. The terrible and unsolved circumstances surrounding his death cast a long shadow. Yet the narrative that lies beneath it is more than simply a Hollywood mystery. There is still a great deal of mystery about the circumstances of George Reeves' demise even after more than 60 years have passed. Each generation appears to rediscover the case, anxious to locate the missing piece, whether it is the misplaced journal, the hint that was ignored, or the confession that was spoken before the ending curtain. But perhaps there is no simple solution to this problem. He was eclipsed by police reports, rumor, and the unreasonable expectations that were placed on a guy who wore a cape. Perhaps the greatest tragedy lay in the fact that George's actual voice was lost amidst all of the clamor. It is possible that the claimed journal was the only location where George could reveal his true identity without feeling threatened. Whether it is a genuine or imagined statement, the term "she was a poisonous snake" represents not just a relationship that is loaded with tension, but also a guy who feels as though he is being cornered by the people and institutions that he previously trusted. Part of what keeps his narrative alive is the fact that it does not have a conclusion. The storylines are not tidy, and the conclusions are not comforting. It refuses to go away. Throughout his career, George Reeves has maintained a trajectory that is still uncomfortably current. A very skilled actor who is confined to a particular role and is having a hard time being taken seriously by an industry that is more concerned with appearance than it is with substance. The circumstances surrounding him are representative of the large number of performers whose careers have been defined and restricted by a single breakthrough role. He was able to get to the top of the famous culture, but it also brought him down. Despite the fact that he was personally experiencing despair, he provided his listeners with a sign of optimism. Because of the isolation, the strain, and the quiet agony that is covered by studio gloss, his death, regardless of whether it was self-inflicted or not, illustrates the darkest side of celebrity existence. It is not always the case that Hollywood is friendly to the same individuals that it praises despite all of its gloss. George Reeves was more than the mystery that surrounded his death, and this supposition has been removed from the equation. At the same time that he was a talented performer, he was also a buddy who was empathetic and someone who actually cared about his followers. Children who had the opportunity to interact with him at charitable events or during hospital visits recalled a guy who radiated kindness even more than he did with his celebrity status. It was during a period when the world was in dire need of heroes that he brought Superman to life. And although he had a sense of confinement in his latter years as a result of the cape, he never ceased exemplifying its virtues, which include bravery, strength, and decency. He was not invulnerable to grief, nor was he immune to being hurt. On the other hand, he was a highly flawed, ambitious, and occasionally troubled individual, and it is precisely this humanity that makes his narrative so lasting. Although the tragedy occurred, George Reeves continues to be cherished. To a certain extent, his portrayal of Superman contributed to the definition of heroism for an entire generation. The fact that he is vulnerable both on and off screen makes him approachable even in this day and age. And the fact that people continue to be fascinated by his life and death is evidence of how strongly he resonated with audiences worldwide. It is possible that the questions will never be answered in their entirety. Possibly, the journal will never be found. It is possible that time, quiet, and conjecture will continue to obscure the truth. The individual who was responsible for the myth continues to exist not just as a cautionary story, but also as a demonstration of resiliency in the face of expectations that are difficult to fulfill. Everyone said that he was Superman. On the other hand, George Reeves was a human being, and that is what made him most memorable. George Reeves died before he ever saw the truth come to light. But his diary, his final words, paint a picture far more chilling than the official report. She ruined me. And now I'm afraid I won't get out. A man once hailed as the Man of Steel, brought to his knees by fear, love, and betrayal. So now we ask you again. Was George Reeves driven to take his own life? Or was he a victim of old Hollywood's darkest power games? Feel free to comment below. And if this story shook you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon because we're uncovering more hidden truths from Hollywood's golden age, one legend at a time.